The crystal chandeliers of Santoro's cast golden light across white linen tablecloths, as Elena Moretti balanced 3 plates along her forearm, her eyes constantly scanning the dining room with practiced vigilance. At 24 years old, she'd learned to navigate the world through sight alone, her deafness sharpening her other senses, until she could read a room's mood from body language and facial expressions invisible to most. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago hummed with the energy of Friday night, wealthy patrons celebrating deals and anniversaries, while Elena moved silently through their world, unnoticed except when they needed something. Her worn shoes pinched with each step, a harsh reminder that she didn't belong among these people who spent more on a single bottle of wine than she earned in a week. She'd become an expert at reading lips from across crowded rooms, a survival skill that had evolved from necessity into something almost supernatural in its precision. Tonight, that ability would save a life and irrevocably alter the course of her own. In the private dining room at the back of Santoro's, the one reserved for the city's most powerful and dangerous clientele, Marco Vitali sat reviewing contracts with the controlled focus that had built his empire. At 32, he commanded respect and fear in equal measure, his tailored suit concealing the lethal grace of a predator who'd clawed his way to the top of Chicago's underworld. His dark eyes missed nothing as his lieutenant, Vincent, poured wine for the assembled business associates, men whose loyalty Marco had purchased with blood and money over the past decade. The meeting was routine, a quarterly review of operations that kept the Vitali family's legitimate and illegitimate enterprises running smoothly. Elena approached the private dining room with her usual tray of appetizers, her manager having specifically assigned her to this section despite her protests. The wealthy men in that room made her uncomfortable with their calculating stares and assumption that her deafness made her stupid or invisible. Through the partially open door, she could see them clearly. 6 men in expensive suits, their body language speaking volumes about power dynamics and barely concealed tensions. Her eyes automatically began reading their lips as she waited for the right moment to enter, a habit so ingrained she barely noticed she was doing it. That's when she saw it. 2 men near the bar, partially hidden behind a decorative screen, their conversation intense and furtive. One of them was Vincent, Marco Vitali's most trusted lieutenant, his scarred hands gesturing sharply as he spoke to a man Elena didn't recognize. "The ricin is already in his wine glass." Vincent's lips formed the words. Clearly, his expression cold and determined. "He'll be dead within 6 hours. Make sure the Castellano family gets credit for the hit." Elena's blood turned to ice as the implications crashed over her. She'd heard whispers about Marco Vitali, knew his reputation as one of Chicago's most powerful crime bosses, but seeing an assassination plot unfold before her eyes transformed distant rumors into immediate, terrifying reality. Her hands trembled as she gripped the tray, her mind racing through impossible choices. She could walk away, pretend she'd seen nothing, and let whatever was going to happen simply occur. The safe choice. The smart choice for someone like her, a deaf waitress with no power and no protectors. But Elena had spent her entire life watching people underestimate her, dismiss her, treat her as if her deafness made her less than human. She'd learned young that the world rarely showed mercy to the vulnerable, and that sometimes the only justice came from those brave or foolish enough to speak up. She pushed through the door with more force than intended, causing every head in the room to turn toward her. Marco Vitali's dark eyes fixed on her immediately, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to sharp interest as he registered something in her face. Fear, determination, urgency, all warring for dominance. Elena set down the appetizer tray with hands that shook despite her best efforts at control. Her eyes locked on Marco's face as she pulled out her phone with fumbling fingers. She typed quickly, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, then turned the screen toward him. "Don't drink the wine. Vincent poisoned it. Ricin, you have minutes." The room exploded into chaos. Vincent lunged toward Elena with murderous intent, but Marco was faster, his hand catching his lieutenant's wrist in a grip that made the older man's face contort with pain. The other men around the table rose in confusion, hands moving toward concealed weapons as they tried to understand what was happening. "Everyone stay exactly where you are," Marco commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority despite its quietness. His eyes never left Elena's face as he gestured toward the wine glass before him. "Someone get Dr. Russo on the phone. Now." "Boss, this is insane," Vincent protested, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. You're going to believe some deaf girl over me? She probably can't even understand what's happening here. Marco's expression turned glacial as he shifted his attention to Vincent, something deadly flickering behind his eyes. Funny thing about that, he said softly, his tone more terrifying than any shout. She seems to understand perfectly. The question is, how did she know about the ricin? Elena's fingers flew across her phone screen again, her survival instinct overriding her fear as she typed out an explanation. I can read lips. I saw Vincent and another man talking by the bar. He said the poison was already in your glass. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush her as Marco processed this information, his calculating gaze moving between Elena and Vincent with predatory focus. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. Vincent, how long have we known each other? 15 years, boss, Vincent replied, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the room. Since we were kids running numbers in Little Italy. You know I would never. Then you won't mind if we have this wine tested, Marco interrupted smoothly, gesturing to one of his men. Take it to the lab. I want results within the hour. Vincent's face drained of color as one of the guards carefully collected the wine glass with gloved hands, sealing it in an evidence bag with practiced efficiency. The movement seemed to trigger something in the lieutenant, desperation, replacing calculation as his hand moved toward his jacket. He never completed the motion. Marco moved with terrifying speed, his own weapon appearing as if by magic, as he pressed the barrel against Vincent's temple with cold precision. Don't, he advised quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. You've already made enough mistakes tonight. Elena watched in frozen horror as the scene unfolded, suddenly acutely aware that she'd inserted herself into a world where violence wasn't just possible but expected. Her legs trembled beneath her, threatening to give out as adrenaline flooded her system. Take him to the warehouse, Marco ordered, his men moving immediately to secure Vincent. I want to know everything. Who he's working for, how long he's been planning this, every detail. As Vincent was dragged from the room, still protesting his innocence with increasing desperation, Marco's attention returned fully to Elena. She stood frozen by the table, her phone clutched in white-knuckled hands as she tried to process what she'd just witnessed. He approached her slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might send her bolting, his expression unreadable as he studied her face with unsettling intensity. When he was close enough that she could read his lips clearly, he spoke with deliberate precision. What's your name? Elena's hands shook as she typed, her fingers fumbling over the keys. Elena Moretti. I'm just a waitress. I didn't mean to get involved in whatever this is. Something that might have been respect flickered across Marco's features as he read her message, his posture relaxing fractionally. Elena Moretti, he repeated, as if testing how her name sounded. You just saved my life. That means you're not just anything anymore. The implications of his words settled over Elena like a heavy blanket, equal parts protection and trap. She'd learned young that in her world, being noticed by powerful people rarely ended well for those without power of their own. I should get back to work, she typed, the words appearing, desperate even to her own eyes. My manager will fire me if I'm gone too long. Marco's expression hardened slightly, though not with anger. Your manager will do exactly what I tell him to, he stated with casual certainty, as will everyone else in this restaurant. He pulled out his own phone, typing with swift efficiency, before turning the screen toward her. Vincent wasn't working alone. Whoever hired him knows you saw something. You're in danger now. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the reality of her situation crystallized with horrifying clarity. She'd thought saving Marco Vitale would be the end of her involvement, a good deed that would let her return to her invisible life. Instead, it had painted a target on her back. What am I supposed to do? She typed, hating the tremor in her hands that betrayed her fear. I have a little sister who depends on me. She's deaf too. We live in a studio apartment in Little Italy. I can't just disappear. Marco's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly as he processed this information, something shifting behind his eyes. How old is your sister? If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. 16. Sophia. Our parents died 3 years ago in a car accident. I'm all she has. The vulnerability in that admission seemed to affect him in ways Elena couldn't quite interpret, his expression softening fractionally before hardening again into determination. Then we protect you both, he stated simply, as if it were already decided. "I have a compound in Lincoln Park with security that would make Fort Knox jealous." "I can't accept that," Elena protested, though even as she typed the words, she knew they were hollow. What choice did she really have? "We're strangers. Why would you go to such lengths?" Marco leaned closer, his cologne expensive and subtle washing over her as he held her gaze with uncomfortable intensity. When he spoke, his lips formed each word with deliberate clarity, ensuring she understood every syllable. "Because you saved my life when you could have walked away. Because someone is trying to kill me, and you're the only witness who can identify them. And because I protect what's mine. Elena Moretti, the moment you warned me, you became mine to protect." The possessiveness in those words should have terrified her. Instead, Elena felt a strange flutter in her chest, a dangerous warmth that had no place in this moment of crisis. Before she could formulate a response, Marco's phone buzzed with an incoming message. His expression darkened as he read it, the temperature in the room seeming to drop several degrees. "The wine tested positive for ricin," he announced, his voice carrying deadly calm. "Enough to kill me 3 times over." His eyes found Elena's again, gratitude and something more complex flickering in their depths. "If I'd taken even a single sip." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood how close he'd come to a slow, agonizing death. "My car is waiting outside," Marco continued, his tone brooking no argument as he gestured toward the private exit. "You're coming with me. We'll collect your sister on the way to the compound." "My manager," Elena began typing, but Marco cut her off with a slight shake of his head, "is being compensated handsomely for your immediate resignation, along with 6 months of your salary as severance," he informed her, showing her another message on his phone that confirmed the arrangement. "Your landlord has already been paid through the end of your lease. Consider it handled." The speed and efficiency with which he dismantled her objections left Elena dizzy, the ground shifting beneath her feet as her carefully constructed life dissolved in the face of Marco Vitali's absolute authority. She should refuse, should insist on maintaining her independence and returning to the life she'd built through years of struggle and sacrifice. But the cold reality of the situation wouldn't be denied. She'd witnessed an assassination attempt, and whoever had hired Vincent wouldn't stop until she was silenced. What about Sophia's school? Her therapy appointments? She has a routine that's important for her development. Marco's expression softened slightly at her concern, revealing unexpected patience. "She'll continue her current schooling and therapy. My people will handle transportation. You have my word that her life will be disrupted as little as possible." The careful consideration he showed for her sister's needs chipped away at Elena's resistance, revealing a complexity to Marco Vitali that didn't fit the monster she'd expected from the whispered stories. "We need to leave now," he added, his hand settling at the small of her back with surprising gentleness as he guided her toward the exit. Before word of Vincent's arrest spreads to his associates, the night air hit Elena's face as they emerged into the alley behind Santoro's, the autumn chill making her shiver in her thin uniform. Marco immediately shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it across her shoulders, the gesture so natural it seemed almost unconscious. A sleek black SUV waited exactly where he'd indicated, its tinted windows and armored frame announcing its purpose more clearly than any words. 2 men in dark suits flanked the vehicle, their watchful eyes scanning the alley with professional vigilance. Marco opened the rear door himself, waiting patiently as Elena climbed inside before following her into the luxurious interior. The leather seats felt impossibly soft after hours on her feet, and the climate control system immediately began warming the cabin to a comfortable temperature. "Address?" Marco asked, pulling out his phone to type rather than speak, the considerate gesture not lost on Elena. She provided Sophia's school address with trembling fingers, still unable to fully process the surreal turn her life had taken. Just hours ago, her biggest concern had been making enough in tips to cover Sophia's new hearing aids. Now, she was riding in a Mafia boss's armored SUV, having witnessed an assassination plot and become something she didn't quite understand, protected, claimed, marked as belonging to one of Chicago's most dangerous men. The drive to Sophia's school passed in tense silence, Elena's mind racing with how to explain this situation to her sister. Sophia was perceptive beyond her years. Having learned young to read the subtleties of body language and facial expression, she would know immediately that something had changed, that the careful balance of their small, safe world had been irrevocably disrupted. Marco seemed content to let her process in silence, his attention divided between his phone, where urgent messages clearly required responses, and the passing streets outside. But every few moments, his gaze would return to Elena, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Washington High School's brick facade appeared through the darkening evening, students streaming from the doors in clusters of animated conversation and laughter. Elena spotted Sophia immediately, her honey-brown hair catching the streetlights as she stood apart from the crowd, hands moving in fluid sign language with her best friend Rachel. "That's her." Elena signed and spoke simultaneously, the habit so ingrained she barely noticed when she did both. The girl with the green backpack. Marco's men moved with professional efficiency, one of them approaching Sophia with careful deference while showing her something on his phone. Elena could see her sister's expression shift from confusion to alarm as she read whatever message they'd provided, her eyes scanning the street until they found the SUV. The moment Sophia climbed into the vehicle, her hands flew in rapid-fire sign language, her face a mixture of fear and anger. "Elena, what's happening?" "These men said there was an emergency but wouldn't explain." "Are you hurt?" Elena's hands moved in response, trying to convey reassurance even as she struggled to find words for the impossible situation. "I'm okay. Something happened at work. This is Marco Vitale. He's protecting us." Sophia's eyes widened as they locked onto Marco, recognition flickering across her features. Even at 16, she knew that name, understood what it meant in their neighborhood. Her hands stilled in her lap, uncertainty replacing her initial anger. Marco pulled out his phone, typing carefully before turning it towards Sophia. "Your sister saved my life tonight. That act of courage put you both in danger. I'm taking you somewhere safe until I can eliminate the threat. You have my word that no harm will come to either of you." The formal promise seemed to settle something in Sophia, her posture relaxing fractionally as she signed back. "For how long?" "As long as necessary," Marco typed, his expression grave. "Days, possibly weeks. I won't lie to you, this is serious. But you'll be protected by the best security team money can. Bye." Sophia turned to Elena, her hands moving with the intimate shorthand they'd developed over years of silent conversation. "Do you trust him?" Elena considered the question carefully, aware that Marco could read every word of their exchange through their body language and expressions, even if he didn't understand sign language. Did she trust him? She barely knew him. Yet something in the way he'd handled the situation, the careful consideration he'd shown for Sophia's needs, the genuine gratitude in his eyes when he'd thanked her all of it, suggested a man more complex than his reputation implied. "I think so." She finally signed back. "And I don't think we have a choice." The drive to Lincoln Park revealed a world Elena had only glimpsed from a distance. Massive estates hidden behind high walls and electronic gates, old money mixing with new power in a neighborhood where safety could be purchased at any price. Marco's compound appeared suddenly through the manicured trees, its iron gates opening silently to admit them. The mansion beyond took Elena's breath away. Not just its size, though it was easily 3 times larger than any building she'd ever entered, but the elegant beauty of its architecture. Warm light spilled from tall windows, illuminating manicured gardens, and a circular driveway where a fountain splashed quietly despite the late hour. "Home sweet fortress," Marco commented with dry humor, though Elena only caught the words by reading his lips in the dim interior light. Staff appeared immediately as they exited the vehicle, professional and discreet as they collected non-existent luggage. A severe-looking woman in her 50s approached with measured steps, her assessing gaze taking in both Elena and Sophia with clinical efficiency. "Mrs. Chen runs the household," Marco explained, typing on his phone so both sisters could read. "She'll show you to your rooms and make sure you have everything you need. Tomorrow we'll arrange for Sophia's school materials, and both of your belongings to be collected from your apartment." "Mrs." Chen's lips moved in greeting, and Elena found herself grateful when the woman immediately pulled out a tablet to type rather than speaking. "Welcome to the Vitale residence. I've prepared adjoining suites in the East Wing. Please let me know if you need anything at all." The suites in question were larger than their entire apartment, with bedrooms that could have fit 3 beds each, and bathrooms that featured heated marble floors and rainfall showers. Sophia's eyes widened as she took in the luxury, her hands moving in stunned sign language. "Elena, this is insane. We don't belong here." "I know," Elena signed back, equally overwhelmed by the sudden change in circumstances. "But it's temporary, just until Marco figures out who's trying to kill him and makes sure we're safe." A knock on the connecting door interrupted their private conversation, Mrs. Chen entering with an armload of clothing that looked suspiciously new and expensive. Mr. Vitale asked me to provide some essentials until your belongings arrive. She typed on her tablet. These should fit, but please let me know if you need different sizes. After Mrs. Chen departed, Elena sank onto the edge of the massive bed, her mind struggling to process the whirlwind of the past few hours. She'd gone from invisible waitress to witness to assassination attempt to, what exactly? Guest? Prisoner? Something else entirely that didn't have a name yet? Her phone buzzed with an incoming message, Marco's name appearing on the screen. Get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning. And Elena, thank you for saving my life and for trusting me with yours and Sophia's safety. Elena stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the reply button before she typed a simple response. Thank you for protecting us. As she lay in sheets that felt like silk against her skin, staring at a ceiling 3 times higher than the one in her cramped apartment, Elena wondered how she would ever return to her old life after experiencing this glimpse of Marco Vitale's world. More frightening was the small voice in the back of her mind whispering that maybe she didn't want to. Morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, dragging Elena from restless sleep into disorienting luxury. For a confused moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The unfamiliar weight of Egyptian cotton sheets, and the distant sound of a fountain completely foreign to her usual reality of traffic noise and thin blankets. Then memory crashed back the assassination plot. Marco Vitale's dark eyes watching her with unsettling intensity, the armored SUV ride to this fortress disguised as a mansion. Elena checked her phone. 7:30 a.m. Sophia would still be sleeping in the adjoining suite, her sister having inherited their mother's ability to sleep through anything. The thought of her mother sent a pang through Elena's chest, wondering what advice she would have given about this impossible situation. A gentle knock on her door preceded Mrs. Chen's entrance, the older woman carrying a breakfast tray that could have fed 4 people. She set it on the small table by the window before pulling out her tablet. Good morning, Miss Moretti. Mr. Vitale requests your presence in his study at 9 o'clock. I've laid out appropriate clothing in your closet. Please help yourself to breakfast. Elena typed back on her phone. Thank you. Is Sophia awake? Not yet. I'll bring her breakfast when she rises. Mr. Vitale has also arranged for a sign language interpreter to be on staff, as well as a tutor who's fluent in ASL to help Sophia keep up with her coursework. The thoughtfulness of the arrangements caught Elena off guard, chipping away further at her preconceptions about Marco Vitale. Ruthless Mafia boss didn't quite fit with someone who would think to hire ASL-fluent staff within 12 hours of meeting a deaf teenager. The appropriate clothing turned out to be designer jeans that fit perfectly, and a soft cashmere sweater in deep blue that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe back home. She studied herself in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed her restless night, but the expensive clothes transformed her from struggling waitress into someone who might actually belong in this world. Marco's study occupied the corner of the mansion's 2nd floor, its walls lined with leather-bound books that looked actually read rather than merely decorative. He stood by the window when she entered, his back to her as he surveyed the grounds below, a phone pressed to his ear. He turned as she approached, his expression shifting from cold authority to something warmer as their eyes met. He held up one finger weight before concluding his conversation with curt efficiency and setting the phone aside. Good morning, he said clearly, ensuring she could read his lips. Then he pulled out his phone to type. I hope you slept well, though I doubt that's true. This situation isn't exactly conducive to rest. The bed was comfortable, Elena typed back diplomatically, not mentioning the hours she'd spent staring at the ceiling, mind racing with scenarios ranging from optimistic to terrifying. Thank you for the arrangements for Sophia. The interpreter and tutor are very thoughtful. Marco's expression softened slightly, satisfaction flickering in his dark eyes. I did some research last night about deaf education and support services. I want Sophia to feel as normal as possible while you're here. She shouldn't suffer because you saved my life. The casual admission that he'd spent his night researching how to help a teenage girl he'd just met did something strange to Elena's chest, warmth spreading through her despite her best efforts at emotional distance. This was the man who ordered torture in warehouses and controlled half of Chicago's criminal enterprises. He shouldn't also be the man who stayed up researching deaf education. Did you learn anything from Vincent? Elena asked, needing to shift the conversation back to safer, more practical territory. Marco's jaw tightened, anger flashing briefly across his features before he controlled it. He talked eventually. He was hired by the Castellano family, my primary rivals. They wanted my territory and saw an inside man as their best opportunity. Vincent has been feeding them information for 6 months. What happens to him now? The question hung between them, heavy with implications they both understood. Marco studied her face carefully, as if gauging how much truth she could handle. He'll face justice according to the rules of my world, he typed finally, which means he won't be a threat to anyone ever again. I won't apologize for that, Elena. In my world, betrayal has only one price. Elena should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the casual discussion of violence. But she found herself nodding slowly, understanding on some fundamental level that the world Marco inhabited operated by different rules than the one she'd known. The Castellanos, are they a threat to Sofia and me? They were, Marco confirmed, his expression grim. Vincent gave them your name and address before we captured him. I have surveillance showing 2 of their soldiers watching your apartment building last night. That's why I moved so quickly to get you both out. Cold dread settled in Elena's stomach as the reality of her danger crystallized. She'd saved Marco's life on instinct, never considering that the simple act of warning him would paint such a large target on her back. Marco must have read the fear in her expression because he crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, his hands settling on her shoulders with surprising gentleness. He waited until she met his eyes before speaking, with deliberate clarity. I will not let anything happen to you or Sofia. You have my word, Elena. The Castellanos made a mistake when they came after my family, and an even bigger one when they threatened you. That debt will be paid in full. The fierce protectiveness in his voice and the intensity in his dark eyes made Elena's breath catch. When he said, my family, did he mean his organization? Or had she and Sofia somehow been included in that designation overnight? Before she could type a response, Marco's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening as he read the message. Problem? Elena asked. The Castellanos are making moves. They hit 3 of my warehouses this morning, trying to provoke a response. They're testing to see if Vincent's capture has weakened my position. What will you do? Marco's smile held no warmth, just cold calculation and barely leashed violence. Show them exactly how badly they miscalculated. But first, I need to make sure you and Sofia are completely secure. I'm doubling the guards on the compound and installing additional security measures. A knock on the study door interrupted them, and one of Marco's men entered, the same one from the restaurant, tall and severe with calculating eyes. He spoke rapidly, his lips moving too fast for Elena to follow completely, though she caught words like movement and east perimeter. Marco's entire body tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon Elena could now see concealed beneath his jacket. He typed quickly on his phone. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except Mrs. Chen. What's happening? Possible breach of the compound security. Probably nothing, but I'm not taking chances with you here. He was gone before Elena could protest, the door clicking shut behind him with ominous finality. She locked it as instructed, her heart hammering as she tried to calm the panic rising in her throat. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Elena paced Marco's study, jumping at every sound. She pulled out her phone to text Sofia, relieved when her sister responded immediately that she was safe in her room with Mrs. Chen. 20 minutes later, a sharp knock made Elena's heart leap into her throat. She peered through the peephole to see Marco, slightly disheveled but apparently unharmed. She unlocked the door with trembling fingers. False alarm, he typed immediately, reading the fear in her expression. Deer triggered the motion sensors, but it reminded me how vulnerable we are with you here during daylight. I'm moving you both to a more secure location until I can neutralize the Castellano threat. Where? I have a property in Lake Forest, about an hour north. It's completely off the books, no public records connecting it to me. You'll be safe there while I handle this situation. Elena wanted to argue, to insist she wasn't some helpless damsel who needed hiding while men fought their wars. But the practical part of her brain recognized the truth. She and Sofia were liabilities in this conflict, innocent bystanders who would only distract Marco from doing what needed to be done. How long? A week, maybe less if things go according to plan. He hesitated, then added, I'll visit when I can. And you'll have constant communication with me and my security team. You won't be isolated. The Lake Forest property turned out to be a sprawling lakefront estate, modern architecture blending seamlessly with the natural landscape. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Lake Michigan, while sophisticated security systems monitored every approach. Sophia's eyes widened as they toured the property, her hands moving in rapid sign language. This is where rich people hide from their problems? Apparently, Elena signed back, unable to suppress a slight smile at her sister's blunt assessment. Though I'm not sure we count as rich people hiding, more like broke people being hidden. Marco had accompanied them personally, overseeing the security setup with meticulous attention to detail. Elena watched him coordinate with his team, noting the way he commanded absolute respect without raising his voice, how his men anticipated his needs before he articulated them. When the last security check was complete and his men had taken up positions throughout the property, Marco finally turned his full attention back to Elena. He gestured toward the deck overlooking the lake, and she followed him out into the cool afternoon air. "I need you to understand something," he typed once they were alone, the wind off the lake whipping his dark hair. "What you did last night warning me about the poison, it wasn't just saving my life. You exposed a traitor who would have eventually destroyed everything I've built. You gave me a chance to protect my legitimate businesses, the people who depend on me for their livelihoods. I just read lips and told you what I saw. Anyone would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't have," Marco countered, his expression intense. "Most people would have looked away, convinced themselves it wasn't their problem. You put yourself in danger to save a stranger. That kind of courage is rare, Elena. Especially in my world." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks under his scrutiny, uncomfortable with the praise. "I've spent my whole life watching people underestimate me because I'm deaf. I've learned to notice things others miss. It's survival, not courage." Marco reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, before his fingers gently tilted her chin up until she met his eyes. "It's both," he mouthed clearly, ensuring she understood every word. "And it's why I won't let anyone hurt you." The intensity in his gaze made Elena's breath catch, awareness crackling between them like electricity before a storm. This close, she could see flecks of amber in his dark eyes, the faint scar along his jawline that suggested a violent past, the way his lips curved just slightly when he looked at her. This was dangerous territory, she realized with sudden clarity. Marco Vitale wasn't just her protector, he was becoming something else entirely, something that had no place in her carefully controlled world. She stepped back, breaking the moment with physical distance. "You should go. You have a war to fight, remember?" Something that might have been disappointment flickered across Marco's features before he masked it. "My second-in-command, Antonio, will be staying here with a full security team. He's been with me 15 years. I trust him with my life, which means I trust him with yours. What about Sophia's therapy appointments? Her school has an assessment next week that's important for her IEP." Marco pulled out his phone, scrolling through notes before showing her the screen. "Already arranged. A therapist will come here 3 times this week, and I've had Sophia's teachers send all materials for the assessment. The ASL tutor can administer it here." The meticulous care he'd taken with details that affected Sophia melted something in Elena's chest, the protective walls she'd built around her heart cracking just slightly. "Thank you. Most people forget about the details when they're trying to help. The fact that you didn't. Sophia is important to you, which makes her important to me," Marco typed simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Take care of yourself, Elena. I'll be back in a few days." He left with his usual efficient grace, the convoy of vehicles disappearing down the private drive within minutes. Elena stood on the deck watching until they vanished from sight, trying to ignore the strange emptiness his absence created. Antonio proved to be a reassuring presence older than Marco by perhaps 10 years, with weathered features and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He'd learned basic sign language during the drive up, enough to greet Sophia and make her laugh with his admittedly terrible grammar. The first 3 days passed in a strange sort of limbo. Elena and Sophia fell into a routine breakfast on the deck. When weather permitted, Sophia's tutoring sessions, in the morning, afternoon walks, along the private beach, evenings spent reading or watching movies in the home theater. It felt like a vacation from their normal lives. If you ignored the armed guards who maintained constant vigilance and the sophisticated security system that tracked every movement on the property. Marco called twice a day, video calls that he'd clearly arranged specifically so Elena could read his lips. He never discussed details of his operations, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the weariness in his eyes that suggested long hours and dangerous work. On the 4th night, Elena woke to her phone buzzing with an incoming call. Marco's name glowed on the screen 3 a.m., which sent immediate alarm through her system. She answered to find him sitting in what looked like a car, his face partially shadowed. "Sorry for the late call. I needed to see your face. What happened? Are you okay?" "Took care of the Castellano problem tonight. Their leadership won't be troubling anyone anymore. You and Sophia can come home tomorrow." There was something in his expression, a haunted quality that made Elena's chest tighten with unexpected concern. "Marco, are you okay?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as if seeing something she couldn't. "I did what needed to be done. But sometimes the weight of it." He trailed off, vulnerability flickering across his features before he shut it down. "Never mind. Get some sleep. I'll see you tomorrow." "Wait," Elena typed quickly before he could disconnect. "Thank you. For keeping us safe. For thinking about Sophia's needs. For treating us like we matter." The smile that curved Marco's lips was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that transformed his entire face. "You do matter, Elena. More than you know." After he disconnected, Elena lay awake for hours, her mind replaying that moment of vulnerability, the way his carefully constructed armor had slipped just enough to reveal the man beneath the reputation. She was in trouble, she realized with growing certainty, because somewhere between warning him about poison and watching him arrange therapy appointments for her sister, she'd started to care about Marco Vitali. And caring about a man like him could only end one way, with her heart shattered and her life irrevocably changed. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, Lake Michigan's waves choppy beneath threatening clouds. Sophia was unusually quiet during breakfast, her hands moving in contemplative sign language. "Do you think we'll ever go back to normal?" she asked Elena. "Our apartment? My school? Your job at the restaurant?" Elena considered the question carefully, aware that her answer would shape how Sophia processed this upheaval. "I think normal might look different going forward, but we'll figure it out together, like we always do." "You like him," Sophia signed bluntly, her teenage directness cutting through Elena's careful diplomacy. "Marco, I can see it in how you look at him." Elena's hands stilled over her coffee cup, caught off guard by her sister's perception. "It's complicated. Because he's dangerous? Or because you're scared?" "Both. Neither. I don't know." Elena's hands moved in frustrated gestures. "He's not what I expected. He's thoughtful and protective, and he actually listens when I communicate. But he's also a criminal who just killed people to solve a problem. How am I supposed to reconcile those two versions of him?" Sophia's expression turned serious beyond her years. "Maybe they're not two versions. Maybe he's just complicated, like everyone else, just with higher stakes." Before Elena could respond, Antonio appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent as he gestured for them to follow him inside immediately. The change in his demeanor sent alarm bells ringing. He typed rapidly on his phone once they were in the secure living room. "Marco's convoy was ambushed 20 minutes ago. He's alive but injured. We're going dark until the situation is contained." Elena's world tilted sickeningly, fear clawing at her throat as she processed the words. "How bad? Don't know details yet, but he got a message out saying to keep you both safe no matter what. The Castellanos had a backup plan, a second wave we didn't anticipate." The next 6 hours passed in agonizing uncertainty. Antonio maintained constant communication with Marco's people, his face growing grimmer with each update. Elena and Sophia stayed in the secure room, the windowless space feeling more like a bunker than a sanctuary. When Antonio's phone finally rang with a video call, Elena nearly knocked over her chair in her haste to see the screen. Marco's face appeared, pale and drawn, with a visible cut along his temple and his arm in a sling. "I'm okay," he typed one-handed before she could even ask. "Took a bullet to the shoulder, but it's a clean through and through. The ambush is over. We got them all." "Define okay because you look terrible," Elena typed back, relief and anger warring in her chest. "Okay means alive and coming to see you as soon as the doctor clears me. Probably tomorrow." "No, you need to rest and heal. We're safe here. Elena, I need to see with my own eyes that you're unharmed. That's not negotiable." "No." The fierce protectiveness in his expression made her heart clench. "You're impossible." "So I've been told. Get some rest. This is almost over. I promise." When the call ended, Elena realized her hands were shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting her with delayed force. Antonio guided her gently to a chair, concern evident in his weathered features. "He'll be fine," he typed on his phone. "Marco's survived worse, and he fights harder when he has something worth protecting." The implication in those words wasn't lost on Elena, warmth spreading through her chest despite her best efforts at emotional distance. Marco arrived the next afternoon, against all medical advice and his own people's protests. Elena heard the commotion before she saw him, Antonio's raised voice, the sound of car doors, then Marco's distinctive footsteps on the hardwood floors. She met him in the entryway, taking in his battered appearance with concern that must have shown clearly on her face. His left arm was properly bandaged and secured in a professional sling, the cut on his temple stitched and already beginning to bruise. But his eyes were alert and focused entirely on her. "You shouldn't be here," Elena typed, even as part of her thrilled at his presence. "You should be in a hospital." "The hospital can wait," Marco replied, his good hand reaching out to cup her face with unexpected tenderness. "I needed to see you, to make sure you were really okay." They stood frozen in that moment, the air between them charged with everything unsaid. Antonio discreetly disappeared, leaving them alone in the vast entryway. "I was worried about you," Elena admitted, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. "When Antonio said you'd been shot, I couldn't breathe. I barely know you, Marco, but the thought of you dying—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the terror that had gripped her at the thought of his death. But Marco seemed to understand anyway, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "I'm sorry I scared you," he typed awkwardly with one hand. "But I'm here now, and the Castellano family is finished. You and Sofia are safe. This nightmare is over." "Is it, though? You're a target, Marco. There will always be someone trying to take what you have, to hurt the people close to you. How do you live with that constant threat?" Marco's expression turned, serious, vulnerability flickering behind his eyes. "By being careful about who I let get close. By maintaining distance from anything that could be used as leverage. I've lived that way for 10 years, Elena. Until 3 days ago, I thought it was the only way." "What changed 3 days ago?" "I met a deaf waitress who saved my life and made me remember what it feels like to want to protect something beyond my territory and reputation." "You changed 3 days ago, Elena." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications and dangerous possibilities. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed what he was really saying, that somehow, in the space of less than a week, they'd become important to each other in ways that defied logic. "This is crazy," she typed, though she made no move to step away from his touch. "We barely know each other. You're a crime boss. I'm a deaf waitress with a teenage sister to support. We exist in completely different worlds. Then, maybe it's time I started living in a different world," Marco suggested, his intensity making her breath catch. "I have enough legitimate businesses now to walk away from the illegal operations. It would take time, careful planning, but it's possible. If I had a reason to want that life." "Marco, I'm not asking you to decide anything right now," he interrupted gently. "I just need you to know that meeting you has made me want things I thought I'd given up on. A normal life, someone to come home to, a future that doesn't end in violence." Sofia appeared at the top of the stairs before Elena could formulate a response, her hands moving in urgent sign language. "Is that Marco? Is he okay?" "I'm fine," Marco signed back clumsily, earning a surprised smile from Sofia. His pronunciation was terrible, but the effort clearly meant something to the teenager. "You learned to sign?" "Been practicing," Marco admitted with a self-deprecating shrug of his good shoulder. "Figured if I'm going to protect your sister, I should be able to communicate with her properly." Sofia's entire face lit up, and she descended the stairs to join them, her hands moving in animated conversation that Marco struggled to follow but clearly appreciated. Watching them interact, Elena felt something fundamental shift in her chest. This dangerous man who ordered hits and controlled criminal empires had spent his recovery time learning sign language. For her sister, because it mattered to Elena. How was she supposed to protect her heart against that kind of thoughtfulness? That evening, after Sofia had gone to bed, Elena found Marco on the deck overlooking the lake. He stood at the railing, his injured arm still secured in its sling, staring out at the moonlight dancing across the water. She approached quietly, making sure she entered his peripheral vision before getting too close. He turned immediately, a smile softening his features as she joined him at the railing. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Shoulder hurts. But mostly I was thinking about tomorrow." "What happens tomorrow?" "I take you and Sofia back to the city, back to reality, and you decide whether you want to stay connected to my world or return to your old life." Elena's chest tightened at the implicit question. She'd been avoiding thinking about what came next, content to exist in this strange limbo where the real world felt distant and manageable. "What do you want?" she asked instead of answering. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his profile sharp against the moonlit lake. When he finally turned to face her fully, the vulnerability in his expression stole her breath. "I want you in my life. However that looks, whatever you're comfortable with. I want to support Sophia's education, make sure she has every opportunity. I want to see where this connection between us leads. But I won't trap you, Elena. You saved my life. I won't repay that by taking away your freedom to choose. The sincerity in his words, the careful way he was offering rather than demanding, made Elena's carefully constructed defenses crumble entirely. I'm scared, she admitted. Of your world, of getting hurt, of making the wrong choice for Sophia's sake. But I'm also tired of just surviving, of scraping by and never letting myself want anything beyond basic necessities. What do you want? Elena took a deep breath, gathering courage before typing her truth. I want to get to know you. The real you, beyond the reputation and the danger. I want to see if this connection is real or just adrenaline and forced proximity. And I want Sophia to be safe and supported while we figure this out. Marco's smile could have lit up the entire lakefront. Then that's what we'll do. Slowly, carefully, at whatever pace you need. I'm not going anywhere, Elena. He reached out with his good hand, and Elena found herself stepping into his embrace, her head resting carefully against his uninjured shoulder as his arm wrapped around her waist. They stood like that for a long moment, the lake breeze washing over them as the moon climbed higher in the sky. For the first time in 3 years since her parents' death had forced her to become both parent and provider to Sophia, Elena allowed herself to imagine a future that included someone else sharing the burden. And for the first time in 10 years, Marco Vitali allowed himself to hope that he might build something beyond his criminal empire. Something real. Something worth protecting even more than his territory and reputation. Something that started with a deaf waitress reading lips across a crowded restaurant and warning a dangerous man about poison. 3 weeks after returning to Chicago, Elena stood in the kitchen of her new apartment, a spacious 2-bedroom in a secure building that Marco owned through one of his legitimate real estate companies. Morning light streamed through windows that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street in Lincoln Square, a neighborhood far removed from the cramped studio she and Sophia had shared in Little Italy. Sophia sat at the breakfast bar doing homework, her new laptop open beside her textbook. The assistive technology Marco had arranged made her coursework easier, captions appearing automatically during video lectures, specialized software translating audio to text in real time. Their lives had transformed so completely that sometimes Elena barely recognized them. Sophia thrived with the additional support therapy twice a week, a private tutor fluent in ASL, access to resources they could never have afforded before. She'd even joined a deaf youth group that met weekly, making friends who shared her experience of navigating a hearing world. But the transformation came with complications Elena hadn't fully anticipated. Marco had been true to his word about taking things slowly. He visited 3 or 4 times a week, usually for dinner that he insisted on cooking himself, apparently a hobby he'd developed during a brief period of normalcy before his parents' deaths had thrust him into leading the family business. They talked for hours, his patient typing on his phone, creating conversations that felt deeper than any Elena had experienced with hearing partners who'd grown frustrated with the effort required to truly communicate with her. He attended Sophia's school events, sitting beside Elena at conferences and presentations with the protective pride of a family member rather than a stranger. He'd even learned more sign language, practicing diligently until he could hold basic conversations with Sophia without relying on typed translations. It should have been perfect. Would have been perfect, if not for the constant reminders of what Marco really was. The morning everything shifted started ordinarily enough. Elena was preparing breakfast when her phone buzzed with a news alert. FBI raids target organized crime operations. Across Chicago, several arrests made. Her stomach dropped as she clicked through to the article, her eyes scanning desperately for Marco's name among those detained. Relief flooded through her when it wasn't there, but the accompanying photo made her blood run cold. Vincent Moretti, the man who'd tried to poison Marco, being led from a federal courthouse in handcuffs, his face bloodied and swollen beyond recognition. The caption noted he'd been arrested on charges of witness tampering after allegedly attacking a federal prosecutor. But Elena could read between the lines. Vincent hadn't attacked anyone. Someone had gotten to him before he could testify. Someone who needed to ensure his silence about the Vitali family's operations. Someone like Marco. Her hands trembled as she typed out a message. Did you do this? Did you have Vincent beaten? Marco's response came within seconds. Can we talk in person? I'm 5 minutes away. Answer the question. The pause before his next message felt like an eternity. Yes, Vincent was. I'm going to cut a deal with the FBI that would have exposed operations beyond just the Castellanos. I couldn't let that happen. Elena's chest tightened, anger and disappointment warring with understanding. She'd known what Marco was, had accepted the reality of his world in abstract terms, but seeing the concrete evidence of violence sanctioned by his orders made it viscerally real in a way she couldn't ignore. When Marco arrived, letting himself in with the key she'd given him just days ago, Elena was waiting in the living room. Sophia had left for school, giving them privacy for what was clearly going to be a difficult conversation. He looked exhausted, she noticed immediately. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, tension evident in the set of his shoulders, but he didn't try to justify or deflect when he saw her expression. "I won't apologize for protecting my organization," he typed before she could speak. "Vincent knew the risks when he betrayed me, and his testimony would have brought down legitimate business people who depend on me for their livelihoods, people with families, children, mortgages. So you had him beaten badly enough to put him in the hospital? That's your solution to every problem? Violence? In my world, sometimes it's the only solution that works. You knew this about me, Elena. I've never hidden what I am." "Knowing in abstract and seeing the concrete reality are different things," Elena countered, her fingers flying across her phone screen with frustrated urgency. "Every time I look at you now, I'll think about Vincent's face, about the people you've hurt or killed to maintain your power." Marco's jaw tightened, pain flickering across his features before he controlled it. Then maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I was fooling myself thinking I could have both worlds, the protection of my organization and a relationship with someone who lives outside of it. Don't do that. Don't make this about me not being able to handle your world. This is about you choosing violence when there might have been other options. What other options? Marco's typing was sharp, his frustration evident. Let Vincent testify and watch my entire operation crumble? See dozens of people lose their livelihoods? Risk my own imprisonment? I don't know, but I can't be with someone who solves every problem by hurting people. Sophia looks up to you, Marco. What kind of example does this set for her? The mention of Sophia made Marco's expression crack, vulnerability breaking through his defensive anger. I would never let Sophia see that side of my life. She's innocent in all of this. But I'm not? I'm just supposed to accept it because I'm an adult? You're supposed to accept it because you chose to let me into your life knowing what I was. I didn't lie or mislead you about my business, Elena. This is who I've always been. The truth of his words stung because Elena couldn't deny them. She had known, had made an informed choice to explore in this connection, despite the danger and moral complexity. But knowing and living with the reality were proving to be very different things. I need some time, she typed finally, exhaustion replacing her anger. To think about whether I can really do this. Whether I can build a life with someone whose solutions always involve violence. Marco's face shuddered, the vulnerability disappearing behind the cold mask she remembered from their first meeting. How much time? I don't know. Days? Weeks? However long it takes to figure out if the man I'm falling for is worth the moral compromises I'd have to make to be with him. She saw the impact of her words falling for in the way his breath caught. The brief softening of his expression before he nodded once, curtly. I'll respect your space. But Elena, what I did to Vincent wasn't about cruelty or unnecessary violence. It was about protecting people who depend on me. Sometimes the choices in my world aren't between good and evil, but between bad and worse. I chose the option that hurt the fewest innocent people. After he left, Elena stood in the middle of her new apartment, the one his money had provided, with its safety and comfort and freedom from constant financial stress, and tried to reconcile the man who'd learned sign language for her sister with the man who'd ordered a beating brutal enough to hospitalize someone. The problem was, they were the same person, and she was realizing that loving Marco Vitale meant accepting all of him, not just the gentle parts he showed her during their careful courtship. 4 days passed in tense silence. Marco respected her request for space, though Elena could feel his presence in the continued security. The way groceries appeared in her apartment that she hadn't ordered, the text from Sophia's tutor confirming that her sessions were paid through the end of the year. He was still protecting them, still taking care of details, even while giving her the distance she'd demanded. Sophia noticed immediately, her teenage perception cutting through Elena's attempts at normalcy. You and Marco had a fight. She signed over dinner on the 4th night. Are you breaking up? We're not together officially, so there's nothing to break up, Elena signed back, the technicality feeling hollow. That's semantics and you know it. You care about him. He obviously cares about you. What happened? Elena hesitated, unwilling to expose Sophia to the full brutality of Marco's world, but also unable to lie to her sister. I saw something in the news about his business. It reminded me that the life he leads involves things I'm not sure I can accept. Sophia's expression turned serious beyond her 16 years. Elena, you've spent 3 years sacrificing everything for me. Working terrible jobs, going without so I could have therapy and hearing aids and a chance at a normal life. For once, someone is taking care of you. Don't throw that away because he's not perfect. It's not about perfection. It's about whether I can live with the reality of who he is and what he does. Can I tell you something honestly? Sophia waited until Elena nodded before continuing. I've never seen you as happy as you've been these past 3 weeks. You laugh more. You don't stay awake at night worrying about bills. You let yourself want things instead of just surviving. Marco did that. And yeah, maybe his world is complicated and dangerous, but he's trying to build something different. For you, for us. Don't you think that deserves a chance? The wisdom in her sister's words settled over Elena like a weight. When had Sophia become so perceptive about relationships? When had their roles shifted enough that the teenager was counseling the adult? That night, Elena lay awake, staring at her ceiling higher than the old apartments, in a building with actual security and working heat, and forced herself to confront the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Marco Vitali. Maybe had already fallen, sometime between watching him cook dinner while signing one-handed and listening to him discuss Sophia's educational goals with her teachers, and seeing the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd admitted wanting a different life. The question wasn't whether she could accept him. It was whether she was brave enough to try. The break-in happened on the 6th night of their separation. Elena woke to Sophia, shaking her shoulder frantically, her sister's face pale with terror in the dim light filtering through the bedroom curtains. Someone's in the apartment, Sophia signed, her hands trembling. I heard glass breaking in the living room. Elena's heart launched into her throat as she grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling to dial Marco, even as she pulled Sophia toward the closet, the only room with a lock from inside. He answered on the first ring. His face, filling the screen instantly. Elena, what's wrong? Someone broke in. We're locked in my bedroom closet. I didn't call 911 because I'm 3 minutes away. I've been parked outside your building every night. Stay hidden. My team is coming. The admission that he'd been watching over them despite their fight should have felt invasive. Instead, Elena felt only relief as she held Sophia close, both of them trying to breathe quietly in the confined space. The sound of footsteps in the bedroom made Elena's blood run cold. Heavy boots, moving with purpose rather than stealth. The closet door handle rattled, someone testing whether it was locked. Then Marco's voice, sharp with authority and barely controlled fury. You have 3 seconds to step away from that door before I put a bullet in your spine. The footsteps retreated quickly, followed by sounds of scuffling and Marco's men securing the intruder. Elena didn't emerge until she heard Marco's gentle knock, his voice clear and calm. It's safe, Elena. You can come out. The apartment looked like a crime scene. Broken glass littered the living room floor where someone had smashed through the balcony door. 2 men in dark clothing sat restrained on her couch, Marco's security team holding them at gunpoint while waiting for police. But Marco's attention was only for Elena and Sophia, his hands moving in careful sign language as he checked Sophia for injuries, before turning to Elena with eyes that blazed with protective fury. They were sent by the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force, he typed once the police had taken statements and removed the intruders. Not to arrest you to scare you. They think if they can drive a wedge between us, you'll testify about things you've witnessed. What things? I haven't witnessed anything except you cooking dinner and helping Sophia with homework. They don't know that. They just know you're connected to me, which makes you a potential asset or liability depending on how they play it. Elena sank onto her couch, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. Sophia had finally fallen asleep in her room after Marco's security team had installed new locks and replaced the broken balcony door with reinforced glass. This is my life now, she typed dully. Break-ins and federal investigations and constant danger. All because I warned you about poison. Marco knelt before her, his hands gently taking her phone so she had to look at his face, at the anguish in his eyes. No, this is your life because I was selfish enough to want you in it, despite knowing what it would cost you. I should have walked away after you saved me. Should have compensated you generously and made sure you were protected from a distance. Why didn't you? Because the moment you looked at me across that restaurant, something fundamental shifted. I've spent 10 years building walls, maintaining distance, refusing to let anyone matter. And then this fierce, brave, deaf woman warned me about poison, and those walls crumbled like they were made of sand. Elena felt tears burning her eyes, the emotional whiplash of the past week crashing over her. I don't know how to do this, Marco. How to love someone whose world is so dangerous that federal agents break into my home to intimidate me. His thumbs wiped away her tears with infinite gentleness, his expression raw with emotion. Then let me show you. Let me prove that I can keep you and Sophia safe while building something better. I've already started divesting from the illegal operations, selling territory, restructuring businesses, creating legitimate paths forward. That's not because of me. It's entirely because of you, Marco interrupted firmly. You made me remember what it feels like to want a future beyond just survival and power. I meant what I said about walking away from this life, Elena. But I can't do it overnight. It takes time and careful planning to extract myself without causing a war that would endanger everyone I'm trying to protect. How much time? 6 months. Maybe a year. I have legitimate businesses that can support my people without the criminal enterprises. But I need to make sure the transition doesn't leave power vacuums that rival families will rush to fill, because those vacuums lead to violence that affects innocent people. Elena studied his face, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability in how openly he was laying out his plans and limitations. This was what she demanded: truth, even when it was complicated and messy. I want to believe you. God, Marco, I want to believe this can work. But I'm terrified. Of your world, of the danger, of loving you and losing you to violence. Then be terrified with me, he suggested softly, his hands framing her face. Because I'm scared too. Of letting you down. Of my past destroying our future. Of being too damaged by this life to build something healthy with you. But I'm willing to try if you are. Sophia appeared in the hallway, her eyes puffy from crying but her expression determined. She crossed to them quickly, her hands moving in rapid sign language. Elena, if you send him away because you're scared, you'll regret it. I know you. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. And I'll spend mine knowing you gave up your chance at happiness because you were trying to protect me from a danger that's already here. Sophia, no. Let me finish. Marco makes you happy. He respects you. He's learned our language and supports my education and treats us both like we matter. Yes, his world is dangerous. But our world has been dangerous too: poverty, discrimination, medical crises we couldn't afford to treat properly. At least with Marco, we have resources to face the danger instead of just surviving it. Elena looked between her sister and Marco, seeing the matching determination in their expressions. The united front they'd apparently formed while she'd been wrestling with her fears. You two are ganging up on me, she signed weakly, unable to suppress a slight smile. Absolutely, Sophia signed back without apology. Because you're being stubborn and self-sacrificing and forgetting that you deserve happiness too. Marco's expression softened as he watched their exchange, though Elena could see he didn't understand all of Sophia's rapid signing. What did she say? That I'm being stubborn. And that I deserve happiness. Elena paused, gathering her courage before adding, she's right. About all of it. I've spent 3 years putting her needs before everything else. And before that, I spent my whole life being careful, staying safe, never taking risks, because the world already felt risky enough being deaf in a hearing society. Elena, I would never ask you to. I'm not finished. She interrupted, her fingers flying across the screen. You scare me, Marco Vitali. Not because you're dangerous, though you are. Not because your world is, violent though it is. You scare me because you make me want to take the biggest risk of all, trusting someone with my heart, believing that I can have more than just survival, imagining a future that includes partnership and support, and maybe even love. The hope that blazed across Marco's features was almost painful to witness. Elena, but I need you to promise me something. Promise that you're serious about leaving the criminal operations, that you'll work toward a legitimate life where Sophia and I aren't targets, that you'll communicate with me honestly, even when the truth is ugly, especially when the truth is ugly. I promise all of it, Marco typed immediately, his fingers steady despite the emotion evident in his expression. I'll be transparent about every step of the transition. You'll know where every business stands, what risks remain, what progress I'm making. No secrets, Elena. Not about anything that affects you and Sophia. Then I'm willing to try. Slowly, carefully, with eyes wide open about the risks. But I'm willing to try. The kiss that followed was gentle, almost reverent. Marco's lips soft against hers as his hands cradled her face. When they finally broke apart, Elena saw moisture in his eyes, emotion he didn't bother hiding. Sophia cleared her throat loudly, making them both startle. Okay, gross. I'm happy for you both, but I'm also 16 and traumatized from tonight's break-in. Can we maybe focus on the fact that federal agents literally broke our window? The absurd normality of teenage embarrassment cut through the tension, making both Elena and Marco laugh. He pulled out his phone to type to Sophia. Already handled. New security system being installed tomorrow. And I'm having my legal team file a formal complaint about tonight's illegal entry. The agents involved will face consequences. Legal consequences or your kind of consequences. Sophia signed, her expression skeptical. Legal, Marco promised, signing back, clumsily. I'm trying to do things differently now. For your sister, for you, for the future I want to build. Sophia studied him for a long moment before nodding, apparently satisfied with his answer. Good, because if you hurt her, I'll learn way more than basic sign language. I'll learn exactly where you keep your weapons and how to use them. The fierce protectiveness in her teenage threat made Marco's smile widen with genuine amusement and respect. Noted. Though I hope it won't come to that. After Sophia returned to bed, Elena and Marco sat together on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched dawn break over Chicago through the new reinforced glass. The city stretched before them, beautiful and dangerous and full of possibility. What happens now? Elena asked, her fingers moving lazily across her phone screen. Now, we take it one day at a time. I continue divesting from the criminal operations. You finish your nursing school applications? Yes, I know. You've been putting them off. Sophia keeps thriving with her education and therapy. And we build something together that's worth all the risk and fear. You make it sound simple. It won't be, Marco admitted honestly. There will be setbacks and dangers and moments when you question whether this was the right choice. But I'll be here through all of it, Elena, fighting for us. Building toward the future we both deserve. Elena tilted her head to look up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes, the vulnerability he allowed her to witness. I love you, she signed, not bothering with her phone because some things needed to be said in her first language. Marco's breath caught, his eyes widening as he processed the gesture. His own hands moved in response, clumsy but clear. I love you, he signed back, his accent terrible but his meaning unmistakable. As the sun rose higher over Chicago, Elena Moretti, deaf waitress turned protector, survivor turned risk-taker, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, loving a dangerous man could lead somewhere beautiful. 3 months later, Elena stood in Marco's downtown office, the legitimate one, where he ran his real estate and import businesses, watching as he signed papers that transferred ownership of 2 more properties into legitimate corporate structures. His lawyer reviewed each document carefully, making notations and explaining implications that Marco listened to with focused attention. Elena had accompanied him to dozens of these meetings over the past months, learning the intricacies of his business operations and the careful dance required to extract himself from criminal enterprises without creating power vacuums. It was tedious work, requiring patience and strategy and constant negotiation with other families about territory and operations. But Marco approached it with the same intensity he'd once applied to expanding his empire, now redirecting that energy toward building something legal and sustainable. Last signature, Marco's lawyer announced, sliding the final document across the mahogany desk. As of today, 70% of your operations are completely legitimate. No criminal exposure, no FBI interest, clean corporate structures that will stand up to any audit. Marco signed with a flourish before turning to Elena with a smile that transformed his entire face. 70%. We're getting there. What about the remaining 30? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. They'd discussed it exhaustively over late-night conversations in his apartment or hers. 6 more months, maybe less. The gambling operations are being sold to the Ricci family. They're old school but honorable, and they'll take care of my people who work those businesses. The last of the protection rackets are being phased out as the businesses find legitimate security companies. It's happening, Elena. Slowly but surely. They celebrated that night with dinner at Santoro's, the restaurant where Elena had saved his life just 4 months earlier. The irony of returning wasn't lost on either of them, as they were seated at a private table with a view of the kitchen where Elena used to work. Do you miss it? Marco asked, signing and speaking simultaneously in the way he'd gotten better at over the months. The restaurant? Your old job? Sometimes I miss the simplicity, Elena admitted, when my biggest concern was making rent and Sophia's therapy bills. But I don't miss the fear, the constant stress of one medical emergency away from homelessness. And now I have different fears. But I also have something I never had before: a partner. Someone who shares the burden instead of expecting me to carry everything alone. Marco reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers. You've made me better, Elena. Not just by inspiring me to leave the criminal life, but by showing me what it means to be truly seen by someone. You don't look at me and see the reputation or the power. You see me. I see a complicated man trying to build something better. That's worth loving. Their meal was interrupted by Sophia's arrival. She'd been at her deaf youth group meeting and asked to join them for dessert. She bounced to their table with teenage enthusiasm, her hands moving in animated sign language as she shared news about her day. Rachel got accepted to Gallaudet University, Sophia signed excitedly, the one in Washington, D.C. for deaf students. She's so excited. Elena felt her heart clench at the mention of Gallaudet, one of the premier universities for deaf students but prohibitively expensive for most families. Sophia had mentioned wanting to apply several times, but Elena had always deflected, knowing they could never afford the tuition. Marco caught the exchange, his expression thoughtful as he watched Sophia's enthusiasm dim slightly when she realized what she'd revealed. He waited until the teenager finished her dessert before signing carefully. You want to apply to Gallaudet? Sophia's eyes widened, flicking between Marco and Elena uncertainly. I was just talking about Rachel. I know we can't afford it. But if money wasn't an issue? If you could go anywhere for college? Marco, we haven't discussed, Elena began, but he gently squeezed her hand. I'm not overstepping. I'm asking Sophia what she wants. Then we'll all discuss it together. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she signed her truth. Gallaudet has the best deaf education program in the country. The entire campus uses sign language. I wouldn't have to constantly translate or explain or feel like I'm on the outside. I'd just be normal. But the tuition is like $40,000 a year, so it's not realistic. What if we made it realistic? Marco suggested, his attention shifting to Elena. I'd like to establish an education fund for Sophia, enough to cover Gallaudet tuition, room, and board, everything she needs. Consider it my way of thanking you for saving my life. Elena's throat tightened with emotion, tears blurring her vision as the offer's magnitude settled over her. Marco, that's too much, it's not enough. He signed firmly. You gave me a future, Elena. Let me give Sophia hers. Sophia looked between them, hope and disbelief warring on her face. Are you serious? You'd really pay for Gallaudet? On one condition, Marco added, his expression serious. You work hard, you stay safe, and you let your sister visit you regularly because she'll miss you terribly. The teenager launched herself at Marco with a hug that nearly knocked him from his chair, her shoulders shaking with happy tears. Elena watched them, her own tears falling freely as she witnessed this dangerous man, who'd entered their lives through violence and chaos, now offering her sister the education she'd dreamed of providing but never could. When Sophia finally released Marco and excused herself to call Rachel with the news, Elena found herself unable to speak, emotion overwhelming her ability to type coherent thoughts. Marco moved his chair closer, his arm wrapping around her shoulders as he pressed a kiss to her temple. I know this is overwhelming, but Elena, I have more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes. Let me use it for something meaningful. Let me invest in your sister's future because she's family now. Because you both are. Family, Elena repeated the sign, the word carrying weight and promise. Family, Marco confirmed, his own hands moving with increasing fluency. If you'll have me. The proposal came 6 months later, on the anniversary of the night Elena had saved Marco's life at Santoro's. He'd arranged an elaborate celebration at his Lincoln Park compound, now feeling like home rather than fortress. With Sophia's deaf youth group friends, Marco's remaining business associates from his legitimate operations, and even Mrs. Chen, who'd become something of a surrogate grandmother to Sophia. But the actual proposal happened earlier, in a quiet moment before the guests arrived. Marco led Elena to the private garden behind the mansion, where 1,000 white roses created a fragrant canopy under the setting sun. In the center, a small clearing held 2 chairs and a table set for 2. Before everyone arrives, I wanted a moment alone. He signed, his fluency now nearly perfect after months of dedicated practice. To talk about our future. Elena's heart hammered as she took her seat, watching Marco's face for clues about what was coming. They'd discussed marriage in abstract terms, but she hadn't expected a formal proposal so soon. 1 year ago tonight, you saved my life. But more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live differently, to build something beyond power and reputation. to believe I could be more than my worst choices. He knelt before her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket with hands that trembled slightly. The past year has been the best of my life. Watching you start nursing school, seeing Sophia thrive, building legitimate businesses that I can be proud of, learning your language so I can tell you I love you, in the words that mean the most to you. He opened the box, revealing a ring that took Elena's breath away. A brilliant diamond surrounded by smaller stones, elegant and understated rather than ostentatious. Elena Moretti, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life earning the gift you gave me when you warned me about poison? Will you build a future with me that's based on trust and partnership and love? Elena's hands shook as she signed her answer, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I'll marry you. Marco's smile was incandescent as he slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that promised forever. When they finally broke apart, Sophia's voice, carried from the house she'd clearly been watching from the window. Finally, I thought he'd never ask. The celebration that followed was joyous and chaotic, with guests from both their worlds mingling in ways that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Marco's legitimate business associates mixed with Sophia's deaf friends, Mrs. Chen teaching basic signs to confused but willing waitstaff, Antonio Marco's second-in-command attempting to communicate with Sophia's ASL tutor through a combination of gestures and laughter. As Elena watched the scene unfold, Marco's arms secure around her waist, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed. A year ago, she'd been invisible, a deaf waitress serving wealthy people who rarely bothered to look at her. Now she stood engaged to one of Chicago's most powerful men, not despite her deafness, but with someone who'd learned her language, who saw her disability as just one facet of who she was rather than a limitation. "What are you thinking?" Marco signed, noticing her contemplative expression. "That a year ago, I saved your life by reading lips across a crowded restaurant, and you saved mine by seeing me when I'd spent so long being invisible." "We saved each other," Marco corrected gently, "and we'll keep saving each other, every day, for the rest of our lives." 6 months later, Elena stood in Marco's study, their study now, since she'd moved into the Lincoln Park compound after the wedding, reviewing the final documents that marked the completion of Marco's transition to legitimate business operations. 100% clean. No criminal enterprises, no FBI investigations, no targets on their backs from rival families seeking to exploit weaknesses. It had taken 18 months of careful negotiation, strategic sales, and delicate maneuvering through the complicated politics of Chicago's underworld. But Marco had done it, fulfilling every promise he'd made to her about building a different life. Sophia was thriving at Gallaudet, her video calls full of stories about her classes and new friends, and the freedom of existing in a world designed for deaf people, rather than constantly adapting to hearing society. She'd be home for Thanksgiving in 2 weeks, excited to meet the new addition to the family. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach, wonder and terror mixing in equal measure. They'd discovered the pregnancy 3 weeks ago, the unexpected news sending both of them into tailspins of excitement and fear. "How are you feeling?" Marco asked, entering the study with 2 cups of tea. He'd learned to make it exactly how Elena liked it, chamomile with honey, warm but not too hot. Nauseous, terrified, excited, all of it at once. He settled beside her on the couch, his hand covering hers on her stomach. "We're going to be amazing parents, and our child will grow up in a world where they're surrounded by love and safety, and opportunity. And sign language," Elena added with a slight smile. "Whether they're deaf or hearing, they'll be bilingual from birth." "The best of both our worlds," Marco agreed, his expression soft with tenderness. A knock on the door interrupted the moment, Mrs. Chen entering with her usual efficiency. "Mr. Vitali, your lawyer is on the phone. He says it's urgent regarding the final business transfers." Marco excused himself, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. She wandered to the window overlooking the gardens, remembering the night Marco had proposed among white roses, the path they'd walked from that dangerous beginning to this peaceful present. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "Are you going to tell me what the big secret is at Thanksgiving? The suspense is killing me." Elena smiled, typing back, "All in good time, but I promise it's good news." When Marco returned, his expression was triumphant. "It's official. Every business is transferred. Every. Operation clean. The FBI closed their investigation. We're free, Elena. Completely free." She crossed to him, her arms wrapping around his waist as his embraced her. "We did it." "You did it," Marco corrected, tilting her chin up so she could read his lips clearly. By believing I could be more than my past. By giving me a reason to want better. We did it together, Elena insisted. That's what partners do. That evening, they hosted a small dinner celebrating the completion of Marco's transition, just their closest friends and associates, who'd supported them through the turbulent months. Antonio gave a toast that Elena couldn't hear but could read on his lips, honoring Marco's courage in choosing love over power. As the night wound down and guests departed, Elena and Marco found themselves alone on the deck overlooking the gardens, the autumn air crisp and clear. "Do you ever miss it?" Elena asked. "The power, the influence, the way people feared and respected you?" Marco considered the question carefully, his answer honest. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, the clear hierarchies, the straightforward problems with straightforward solutions. But what I have now is so much better. A wife who challenges me, a sister-in-law who makes me laugh, a baby on the way, businesses I can be proud of, a future that doesn't end in violence. And if you could go back, if you could choose differently that night at Santoro's, I'd choose you every time." Marco signed without hesitation. "Getting poisoned was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it brought you into my life." Elena laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet evening. "Only you would say that attempted murder was the best thing to happen to you." "It brought me you," Marco repeated, his expression serious despite her teasing. "Everything else is just details." As they stood together watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From deaf waitress and mafia boss, to partners, lovers, spouses. From violence and danger, to safety and hope. She'd saved his life by reading lips across a restaurant. He'd saved hers by seeing past her disability to the woman beneath. And together, they'd built something worth more than power or money or reputation. They'd built a family, a future, a love that had survived attempted assassinations, federal investigations, and the complicated transition from criminal empire to legitimate success. Most importantly, they'd built trust the kind that came from choosing each other every day, through fear and doubt, and the thousand small challenges that tested their commitment. "I love you," Elena signed, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "I love you," Marco signed back, his fluency perfect, his meaning unmistakable. And as they turned back toward the house, their home, filled with warmth and safety and possibility, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice that night at Santoro's. Warning Marco Vitali about poison had changed everything, but choosing to love him had transformed her entire world. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.